Hello there, mere imaginary friend. Today I would like to continue our reading of Undine by Friedrich de la Motte Fouqué. This will be our third session. If you have not heard the first session yet, do start with that. If you've heard the first but you haven't heard the second, then you can find that there as well. We're getting into chapter 5 now. We'll see how far we get into it today. Next morning, when Huldbrand awoke from slumber and perceived that his beautiful wife was not by his side, he began to give way again to his wild imaginations, that his marriage and even the lovely Undine herself were only shadows without substance, only mere illusions of enchantment. But she entered the door at the same moment, kissed him, seated herself on the bed by his side, and said, "I've been out somewhat early this morning to see whether my uncle keeps his word. He's already restored the waters of the flood to his own calm channel, and he now flows through the forest a rivulet as before, in a lonely and dreamlike current. His friends, too, both of the water and the air, have resumed their usual peaceful tenor. All will again proceed with order and tranquillity, and you can travel homeward without fear of the flood whenever you choose." It seemed to the mind of Huldbrand that he must be in some waking dream, so little was he able to understand the nature of his wife's strange relative. Notwithstanding this, he made no remark upon what she had told him, and her surpassing loveliness soon lulled every misgiving and discomfort to rest. Some time afterwards, while he was standing with her before the door and surveying the verdant point of land with its boundary of bright waters, such a feeling of bliss came over him in this cradle of his love that he exclaimed, "Shall we then, so early as today, begin our journey? Why should we? It is probable that abroad in the world we shall find no days more delightful than those we've spent in this green isle, so secret and so secure. Let us yet see the sun go down here 2 or 3 times more." "Just as my lord wills," replied Undine meekly. "Only we must remember that my foster parents will, at all events, see me depart with pain, and should they now for the first time discover the true soul in me, and how fervently I can now love and honor them, their feeble eyes would surely become blind with weeping. As yet they consider my present quietness and gentleness as of no better promise than they were formerly, like the calm of the lake, just while the air remains tranquil, and they will learn soon to cherish a little tree or flower as they have cherished me. Let me not, then, make known to them this newly bestowed, this loving heart, at the very moment they must lose it for this world. And how could I conceal what I've gained, if we continued longer together?" Huldbrand yielded to her representation, and went to the aged couple to confer with them respecting his journey, on which he proposed to set out that very hour. The priest offered himself as a companion to the young married pair, and after taking a short farewell, he held the bridle while the knight lifted his beautiful wife upon his horse, and with rapid steps they crossed the dry channel with her toward the forest. Undine wept in silent but intense emotion. The old people, as she moved away, were more clamorous in the expression of their grief. They appeared to feel at the moment of separation all that they were losing in their affectionate foster daughter. The 3 travelers had reached the thickest shade of the forest without interchanging a word. It must have been a fair sight in that hall of leafy verdure to see this lovely woman's form sitting on the noble and richly ornamented steed, on her left hand the venerable priest in the white garb of his order, on her right the blooming young knight, clad in splendid raiment of scarlet, gold, and violet, girt with a sword that flashed in the sun, and attentively walking beside her. Huldbrand had no eyes but for his wife. Undine, who had dried her tears of tenderness, had no eyes but for him, and they soon entered into the still and voiceless converse of looks and gestures, from which, after some time, they were awakened by the low discourse which the priest was holding with a 4th traveller, who had meanwhile joined them unobserved. He wore a white gown, resembling in form the dress of the priest's order, except that his hood hung very low over his face, and that the whole drapery floated in such wide folds around him as obliged him every moment to gather it up and throw it over his arm, or by some management of this sort to get it out of his way. And still it did not seem in the least to impede his movements. When the young couple became aware of his presence, he was saying, "And so, venerable sir, many as have been the years I have dwelt here in this forest, I've never received the name of hermit in your sense of the word. For, as I said before, I know nothing of penance, and I think, too, that I have no particular need of it. Do you ask me why I'm so attached to the forest? It is because its scenery is so peculiarly picturesque, and affords me so much pastime when, in my floating white garments, I pass through its world of leaves and dusky shadows, and when a sweet sunbeam glances down upon me at times unexpectedly." "You're a very singular man," replied the priest, "and I should like to have a more intimate acquaintance with you." "And who, then, may you be yourself, to pass from one thing to another?" inquired the stranger. "I'm called Father Heilmann," answered the holy man, "and I'm from the cloister of Our Lady of the Salutation beyond the lake." "Well, well," replied the stranger, "my name is Kuhleborn, and were I a stickler for the nice distinctions of rank, I might, with equal propriety, require you to give me the title of noble lord of Kuhleborn, or free lord of Kuhleborn, for I am as free as the birds in the forest, and it may be a trifle more so. For example, I now have something to tell that young lady there." And before they were aware of his purpose, he was on the other side of the priest, close to Undine, and stretching himself high into the air in order to whisper something in her ear. But she shrank from him in terror and exclaimed, "I have nothing more to do with you." "Ho, ho!" cried the stranger with a laugh. "You have made a grand marriage indeed, since you no longer know your own relations. Have you no recollection, then, of your uncle Kuhleborn, who so faithfully bore you on his back to this region?" "However that may be," replied Undine, "I entreat you never to appear in my presence again. I am now afraid of you, and will not my husband fear and forsake me if he sees me associate with such strange company and kindred?" "You must not forget, my little niece," said Kuhleborn, "that I am with you here as a guide. Otherwise these madcap spirits of the earth, the gnomes that haunt this forest, would play you some of their mischievous pranks. Let me therefore still accompany you in peace. Even the old priest there had a better recollection of me than you have, for he just now assured me that I seemed to be very familiar to him, and that I must have been with him in the ferry-boat out of which he tumbled into the waves. He certainly did see me there, for I was no other than the water-spout that tore him out of it and kept him from sinking, while I safely wafted him ashore to your wedding." Undine and the knight turned their eyes upon Father Heilmann, but he appeared to be moving forward just as if he were dreaming or walking in his sleep, and no longer to be conscious of a word that was spoken. Undine then said to Kuhleborn, "I already see yonder the end of the forest. We have no further need of your assistance, and nothing now gives us alarm but yourself. I therefore beseech you, by our mutual love and goodwill, to vanish and allow us to proceed in peace." Kuhleborn seemed to become angry at this. He darted a frightful look at Undine and grinned fiercely upon her. She shrieked aloud and called her husband to protect her. The knight sprang round the horse as quick as lightning, and brandishing his sword, struck at Kuhleborn's head. But instead of severing it from his body, the sword merely flashed through a torrent which rushed foaming near them from a lofty cliff, and with a splash which much resembled in sound a burst of laughter. The stream all at once poured upon them and gave them a thorough wetting. The priest, as if suddenly awakening from a trance, coolly observed, "This is what I have been some time expecting, because the brook has descended from the steep so close beside us, though at first sight, indeed, it appeared to resemble a man, and to possess the power of speech." As the waterfall came rushing from its crag, it distinctly uttered these words in Huldbrand's ear: "Rash knight, valiant knight, I'm not angry with you. I have no quarrel with you. Only continue to defend your lovely little wife with the same spirit, you bold knight, you valiant champion." After advancing a few steps farther, the travelers came out upon open ground. The imperial city lay bright before them, and the evening sun, which gilded its towers with gold, kindly dried their garments that had been so completely drenched. The sudden disappearance of the young knight Huldbrand of Ringstetten had occasioned much remark in the imperial city, and no small concern amongst those who, as well on account of his expertness in tourney and dance as of his mild and amiable manners, had become attached to him. His attendants were unwilling to quit the place without their master, although not a soul of them had been courageous enough to follow him into the fearful recesses of the forest. They remained, therefore, at the hostelry, idly hoping, as men are wont to do, and keeping the fate of their lost lord fresh in remembrance by their lamentations. Now, when the violent storms and floods had been observed immediately after his departure, the destruction of the handsome stranger became all but certain. Even Bertalda had openly discovered her sorrow, and detested herself for having been the cause of his taking that fatal excursion into the forest. Her foster parents, the Duke and Duchess, had meanwhile come to take her away, but Bertalda persuaded them to remain with her until some certain news of Huldbrand should be obtained, whether he were living or dead. She endeavoured also to prevail upon several young knights, who were assiduous in courting her favour, to go in quest of the noble adventurer in the forest. But she refused to pledge her hand as the reward of the enterprise, because she still cherished, it might be, a hope of its being claimed by the returning knight. And no one would consent for a glove, a riband, or even a kiss to expose his life to bring back so very dangerous a rival. When Huldbrand now made his sudden and unexpected appearance, his attendants, the inhabitants of the city, and almost everyone rejoiced. This was not the case with Bertalda, for although it might be quite a welcome event to others that he brought with him a wife of such exquisite loveliness, and Father Heilmann as a witness of their marriage, Bertalda could not but view the affair with grief and vexation. She had in truth become attached to the young knight with her whole soul, and her mourning for his absence or supposed death had shown this more than she could now have wished. But notwithstanding all this, she conducted herself like a wise maiden in circumstances of such delicacy, and lived on the most friendly terms with Undine, whom the whole city looked upon as a princess that Huldbrand had rescued in the forest from some evil enchantment. Whenever anyone questioned either herself or her husband relative to surmises of this nature, they had wisdom enough to remain silent, or wit enough to evade the inquiries. The lips of Father Heilmann had been sealed in regard to idle gossip of every kind, and besides, on Huldbrand's arrival, he had immediately returned to his cloister, so that people were obliged to rest contented with their own wild conjectures, and even Bertalda herself ascertained nothing more of the truth than others. For the rest, Undine daily felt more love for the fair maiden. "We must have been before acquainted with each other," she often used to say to her, "or else there must be some mysterious connection between us, for it is incredible that anyone so perfectly without cause, I mean without some deep and secret cause, should be so fondly attached to another as I have been to you from the first moment of our meeting." And even Bertalda could not deny that she felt a confiding impulse, an attraction of tenderness towards Undine, much as she deemed this fortunate rival the cause of her bitterest disappointment. Under the influence of this mutual regard, they found means to persuade the one her foster parents and the other her husband to defer the day of separation to a period more and more remote. Nay, more, they had already begun to talk of a plan for Bertalda's accompanying Undine to Castle Ringstetten, near one of the sources of the Danube. Once on a fine evening they happened to be talking over their scheme just as they passed the high trees that bordered the public walk. The young married pair, though it was somewhat late, had called upon Bertalda to invite her to share their enjoyment, and all three proceeded familiarly up and down beneath the dark blue heaven, not seldom interrupted in their converse by the admiration which they could not but bestow upon the magnificent fountain in the middle of the square, and upon the wonderful rush and shooting upward of its waters. All was sweet and soothing to their minds. Among the shadows of the trees stole in glimmerings of light from the adjacent houses. A low murmur of children at play and of other persons who were enjoying their walk floated around them. They were so alone, and yet sharing so much of social happiness in the bright and stirring world, that whatever had appeared rough by day now became smooth of its own accord. All the three friends could no longer see the slightest cause for hesitation in regard to Bertalda's taking the journey. At that instant, while they were just fixing the day of their departure, a tall man approached them from the middle of the square, bowed respectfully to the company, and spoke something in the young bride's ear. Though displeased with the interruption and its cause, she walked aside a few steps with the stranger, and both began to whisper, it seemed, in a foreign tongue. Huldbrand thought he recognized the strange man of the forest, and he gazed upon him so fixedly that he neither heard nor answered the astonished inquiries of Bertalda. All at once Undine clapped her hands with delight and turned back from the stranger, laughing. He, frequently shaking his head, retired with a hasty step and discontented air, and descended into the fountain. Huldbrand now felt perfectly certain that his conjecture was correct, but Bertalda asked, "What then, dear Undine, did the master of the fountain wish to say to you?" Undine laughed within herself and made answer, "The day after tomorrow, my dear child, when the anniversary of your name-day returns, you shall be informed." And this was all she could be prevailed upon to disclose. She merely asked Bertalda to dinner on the appointed day, and requested her to invite her foster parents, and soon afterwards they separated. "Culeborn," said Huldbrand to his lovely wife, with an inward shudder, when they had taken leave of Bertalda and were now going home through the darkening streets. "Yes, it was he," answered Undine, "and he would have wearied me with his foolish warnings. But in the midst, quite contrary to his intentions, he delighted me with a most welcome piece of news. If you, my dear lord and husband, wish me to acquaint you with it now, you need only command me, and I will freely and from my heart tell you all without reserve. But would you confer upon your Undine a very, very great pleasure, wait till the day after tomorrow, and then you too shall have your share of the surprise." The knight was quite willing to gratify his wife in what she had asked so sweetly, and even as she was falling asleep, she murmured to herself with a smile, "How she will rejoice and be astonished at what her master of the fountain has told me. Dear, dear Bertalda." Chapter 6. The company were sitting at dinner. Bertalda, adorned with jewels and flowers without number, the presents of her foster parents and friends, and looking like some goddess of spring, sat beside Undine and Huldbrand at the head of the table. When the sumptuous repast was ended, and the dessert was placed before them, permission was given that the doors should be left open. This was in accordance with the good old custom in Germany, that the common people might see and rejoice in the festivity of their superiors. Among these spectators, the servants carried round cake and wine. Huldbrand and Bertalda waited with secret impatience for the promised explanation, and hardly moved their eyes from Undine. But she still continued silent, and merely smiled to herself with secret and heartfelt satisfaction. All who were made acquainted with the promise she had given could perceive that she was every moment on the point of revealing a happy secret, and yet as children sometimes delay tasting their choicest dainties, she still withheld the communication. Bertalda and Huldbrand shared the same delightful feeling, while in anxious hope they were expecting the unknown disclosure which they were to receive from the lips of their friend. At this moment, several of the company pressed Undine to sing. This she seemed pleased at, and ordering her lute to be brought, she sang the following words. "Morning so bright, with wildflowers so gay, where high grass so dewy crowns the wavy lake's border. On the meadow's verdant bosom, what glimmers there so white? have wreaths of snowy blossoms, soft floating, fallen from heaven. Ah, see, a tender infant, it plays with flowers, unwittingly. It strives to grasp morn's golden beams. Oh, where, sweet stranger, where's your home? Afar from unknown shores the waves have wafted hither this helpless little one. Nay, clasp not, tender darling, with tiny hand the flowers. No hand returns the pressure. The flowers are strange and mute. They clothe themselves in beauty. They breathe a rich perfume, but cannot fold around you a mother's loving arms. Far, far away, that mother's fond embrace. Life's early dawn just opening faint, your eye yet beaming heaven's own smile. So soon your tenderest guardian's gone. Severe, poor child, your fate, all to you unknown. A noble duke has crossed the mead, and near you checked his steed's career. Wonder and pity touched his heart. With knowledge high and manners pure, he rears you, makes his castle home your own. How great, how infinite your gain! Of all the land you bloom the loveliest. Yet the priceless blessing, the bliss of parents' fondness, you left on strands unknown. Undine let fall her lute with a melancholy smile. The eyes of Bertalda's noble foster-parents were filled with tears. Yes, it was so. Such was the morning on which I found you, poor orphan, cried the Duke with deep emotion. The beautiful singer is certainly right. Still, the priceless blessing, the bliss of parents' fondness, it was beyond our power to give you. But we must hear also what happened to the poor parents, said Undine, as she struck the chords and sung. Through her chambers roams the mother, searching, searching everywhere, seeks and knows not what, with yearning, childless house still finding there. Childless house, O sound of anguish! She alone the anguish knows. There by day who led her dear one, there who rocked its night's repose. Beechen buds again are swelling, sunshine warms again the shore. Ah, fond mother, cease your searching, comes the loved and lost no more. Then when airs of eve are freshening, home the father wends his way, while with smiles his woe he's veiling, gushing tears his heart betray. Well he knows within his dwelling, still as death, he'll find the gloom. Only hear the mother moaning, no sweet babe to smile him home. Oh, tell me, in the name of heaven, tell me, Undine, where are my parents? Cried the weeping Bertalda. You certainly know, you must have discovered them, you wonderful being, for otherwise you would never have thus torn my heart. Can they be here already? May I believe it possible? Her eye glanced rapidly over the brilliant company and rested upon a lady of high rank, who was sitting next to her foster father. Then, bending her head, Undine beckoned toward the door, while her eyes overflowed with the sweetest emotion. Where, then, are the poor parents waiting? She asked, and the old fisherman, hesitating, advanced with his wife from the crowd of spectators. They looked inquiringly now at Undine, and now at the beautiful lady who was said to be their daughter. It is she there before you, exclaimed the restorer of their child, her voice half choked with rapture. And both the aged parents embraced their recovered daughter, weeping aloud and praising God. But, terrified and indignant, Bertalda tore herself from their arms. Such a discovery was too much for her proud spirit to bear, especially at the moment when she had doubtless expected to see her former splendor increased, and when hope was picturing to her nothing less brilliant than a royal canopy and a crown. It seemed to her as if her rival had contrived all this on purpose, to humble her before Huldbrand and the whole world. She reproached Undine, she reviled the old people, and even such offensive words as deceiver, bribed and perjured impostors burst from her lips. The aged wife of the fisherman then said to herself in a low voice, "Oh, my God, she has become wicked, and yet I feel in my heart that she is my child." The old fisherman had meanwhile folded his hands and offered up a silent prayer that she might not be his daughter. Undine Faint and pale as death, turned from the parents to Bertalda, from Bertalda to the parents. She was suddenly cast down from all that heaven of happiness in which she had been dreaming, and plunged into an agony of terror and disappointment which she had never known even in dreams. "Have you then a soul? Have you indeed a soul, Bertalda?" she cried again and again to her angry friend, as if with vehement effort she would arouse her from a sudden delirium or some distracting dream of night, and restore her to recollection. But when Bertalda became every moment only more and more enraged, when the disappointed parents began to weep aloud, and the company with much warmth of dispute were espousing opposite sides, she begged with such earnestness and dignity for the liberty of speaking in this her husband's hall, that all around her were in an instant hushed to silence. She then advanced to the upper end of the table, where, both humbled and haughty, Bertalda had seated herself, and, while every eye was fastened upon her, spoke in the following manner. "My friends, you appear dissatisfied and disturbed, and you are interrupting with your strife of festivity I had hoped would bring joy to you and to me. Ah, I knew nothing of your heartless ways of thinking, and never shall understand them. I am not to blame for the mischief this disclosure has done. Believe me, little as you may imagine this to be the case, it is wholly owing to yourselves. One word more, therefore, is all I have to add, but this is one that must be spoken. I have uttered nothing but truth. Of the certainty of the fact I give you the strongest assurance. No other proof can I or will I produce, but this I will affirm in the presence of God. The person who gave me this information was the very same who decoyed the infant Bertalda into the water, and who, after thus taking her from her parents, placed her on the green grass of the meadow where he knew the Duke was to pass." "She's an enchantress," cried Bertalda, "a witch that has intercourse with evil spirits. She acknowledges it herself." "Never. I deny it," replied Undine, while a whole heaven of innocence and truth beamed from her eyes. "I am no witch. Look upon me and say if I am." "Then she utters both falsehood and folly," cried Bertalda, "and she is unable to prove that I am the child of these low people. My noble parents, I entreat you to take me from this company and out of this city, where they do nothing but shame me." But the aged Duke, a man of honourable feeling, remained unmoved, and his wife remarked, "We must thoroughly examine into this matter. God forbid that we should move a step from this hall before we do so." Then the aged wife of the fisherman drew near, made a low obeisance to the Duchess, and said, "Noble and pious lady, you have opened my heart. Permit me to tell you that if this evil-disposed maiden is my daughter, she has a mark, like a violet, between her shoulders, and another of the same kind on the instep of her left foot. If she will only consent to go out of the hall with me—" "I will not consent to uncover myself before the peasant woman," interrupted Bertalda, haughtily turning her back upon her. "But before me you certainly will," replied the Duchess gravely. "You will follow me into that room, maiden, and the old woman shall go with us." The three disappeared, and the rest continued where they were, in breathless expectation. In a few minutes the females returned, Bertalda pale as death, and the Duchess said, "Justice must be done. I therefore declare that our lady hostess has spoken exact truth. Bertalda is the fisherman's daughter. No further proof is required, and this is all of which, on the present occasion, you need to be informed." The princely pair went out with their adopted daughter. The fisherman, at a sign from the Duke, followed them with his wife. The other guests retired in silence, or suppressing their murmurs, while Undine sank weeping into the arms of Huldbrand. The Lord of Ringstetten would certainly have been more gratified had the events of this day been different, but even such as they now were, he could by no means look upon them as unwelcome, since his lovely wife had shown herself so full of goodness, sweetness, and kindliness. "If I have given her a soul," he could not help saying to himself, "I have assuredly given her a better one than my own." and he now only thought of soothing and comforting his weeping wife, and of removing her even so early as the morrow from a place which, after this cross accident, could not fail to be distasteful to her. Yet it is certain that the opinion of the public concerning her was not changed, as something extraordinary had long before been expected of her. The mysterious discovery of Bertalda's parentage had occasioned little or no surprise, and every one who became acquainted with Bertalda's story, and with the violence of her behaviour on that occasion, was only disgusted and set against her. Of this state of things, however, the knight and his lady were as yet ignorant. Besides, whether the public condemned Bertalda or herself, the one view of the affair would have been as distressing to Undine as the other. And thus they came to the conclusion that the wisest course they could take was to leave behind them the walls of the old city with all the speed in their power. With the earliest beams of morning, a brilliant carriage for Undine drove up to the door of the inn. The horses of Huldbrand and his attendants stood near, stamping the pavement, impatient to proceed. The knight was leading his beautiful wife from the door when a fisher girl came up and met them in the way. "We've no need of your fish," said Huldbrand, accosting her. "We are this moment setting out on a journey." Upon this the fisher girl began to weep bitterly, and then it was that the young couple first perceived it was Bertalda. They immediately returned with her to their apartment, where informed them that, owing to her unfeeling and violent conduct on the preceding day, the Duke and Duchess had been so displeased with her as entirely to withdraw from her their protection, though not before giving her a generous portion. The fisherman, too, had received a handsome gift, and had the evening before set out with his wife for his peninsula. "I would have gone with them," she pursued, "but the old fisherman, who is said to be my father—" "He is in truth your father, Bertalda," said Undine, interrupting her. "See, the stranger whom you took for the master of the waterworks gave me all the particulars. He wished to dissuade me from taking you with me to Castle Ringstetten, and therefore disclosed to me the whole mystery." "Well, then," continued Bertalda, "my father, if it must needs be so, my father said, 'I will not take you with me until you are changed. If you will venture to come to us alone through the ill-omened forest, that shall be a proof of your having some regard for us. But come not to me as a lady. Come merely as a fisher girl.' I do as he bade me, for since I am abandoned by all the world, I will live and die in solitude, a poor fisher girl with parents equally poor. The forest indeed appears very terrible to me. Horrible spectres make it their haunt, and I am so fearful. But how can I help it? I have only come here at this early hour to beg the noble lady of Ringstetten to pardon my unbecoming behaviour of yesterday. Sweet lady, I have the fullest persuasion that you meant to do me a kindness, but you were not aware how severely you would wound me. And then in my agony and surprise, so many rash and frantic expressions burst from my lips. Forgive me, forgive me. I am in truth so unhappy already. Only consider what I was but yesterday morning, and what I was even at the beginning of your yesterday's festival, and what I am today." Her words now became inarticulate, lost in a passionate flow of tears, while Undine, bitterly weeping with her, fell upon her neck. So powerful was her emotion that it was a long time before she could utter a word. At length she said, "You shall still go with us to Ringstetten. All shall remain just as we lately arranged it. But say thou to me again, and do not call me noble lady any more. Consider we were changed for each other when we were children. Even then we were united by a like fate, and we will strengthen this union with such close affection as no human power shall dissolve. Only first of all you must go with us to Ringstetten. How we shall share all things as sisters we can talk of after we arrive." Bertalda looked up to Huldbrand with timid inquiry. He pitied her in her affliction, took her hand, and begged her tenderly to entrust herself to him and his wife. "We will send a message to your parents," continued he, "giving them the reason why you have not come." And he would have added more about his worthy friends of the peninsula, when, perceiving that Bertalda shrank in distress at the mention of them, he refrained. He took her under the arm, lifted her first into the carriage, then Undine, and was soon riding blithely beside them. So persevering was he in urging forward their driver that in a short time they had left behind them the limits of the city and a crowd of painful recollections. And now the ladies could take delight in the beautiful country which their progress was continually presenting. After a journey of some days, they arrived on a fine evening at Castle Ringstetten. The young knight became much engaged with the overseers and menials of his establishment. Undine and Bertalda were left alone. They took a walk upon the high rampart of the fortress, and were charmed with the delightful landscape which the fertile Swabia spread around them. While they were viewing the scene, a tall man drew near, who greeted them with respectful civility, and who seemed to Bertalda much to resemble the director of the city fountain. Still less was the resemblance to be mistaken when Undine, indignant at his intrusion, waved him off with an air of menace, while he, shaking his head, retreated with rapid strides, as he had formerly done, then glided among the trees of a neighbouring grove and disappeared. "Do not be terrified, Bertalda," said Undine. "The hateful master of the fountain shall do you no harm this time." And then she related to her the particulars of her history and who she was herself, how Bertalda had been taken away from the people of the peninsula and Undine left in her place. This relation at first filled the young maiden with amazement and alarm. She imagined her friend must be seized with a sudden madness. But from the consistency of her story she became more and more convinced that all was true. It so well agreed with former occurrences, and still more convinced from that inward feeling with which truth never fails to make itself known to us. She could not but view it as an extraordinary circumstance that she was herself now living, as it were, in the midst of one of those wild tales which she had formerly heard related. She gazed upon Undine with reverence, but could not keep from a shuddering feeling which seemed to come between her and her friend, and she could not but wonder, when the knight at their evening repast showed himself so kind and full of love toward a being who appeared to her after the discoveries just made more to resemble a phantom of the spirit world than one of the human race. Chapter 7. The writer of this tale, both because it moves his own heart and he wishes it to move that of others, asks a favour of you, dear reader. Forgive him if he passes over a considerable space of time in a few words, and only tells you generally what therein happened. He knows well that it might be unfolded skilfully, and step by step, how Huldbrand's heart began to turn from Undine and towards Bertalda. How Bertalda met the young knight with ardent love, and how they both looked upon the poor wife as a mysterious being, more to be dreaded than pitied. How Undine wept, and her tears stung the conscience of her husband, without recalling his former love, so that, though at times he showed kindness to her, a cold shudder soon forced him to turn from her to his fellow mortal, Bertalda. All this the writer knows might have been drawn out fully, and perhaps it ought to have been, but it would have made him too sad, for he has witnessed such things, and shrinks from recalling even their shadow. Thou knowest, probably, the like feeling, dear reader, for it is the lot of mortal man. Happy art thou if thou hast received the injury, not inflicted it, for in this case it is more blessed to receive than to give. Then only a soft sorrow at such a recollection passes through thy heart, and perhaps a quiet tear trickles down thy cheek over the faded flowers in which thou once so heartily rejoiced. This is enough. We will not pierce our hearts with 1,000 separate stings, but only bear in mind that all happened as I just now said. Poor Undine was greatly troubled, and the other two were very far from being happy. Bertalda, in particular, whenever she was in the slightest degree opposed in her wishes, attributed the cause to the jealousy and oppression of the injured wife. She was therefore daily in the habit of showing a haughty and imperious demeanour, to which Undine yielded with a sad submission, and which was generally encouraged strongly by the now blinded Huldbrand. What disturbed the inmates of the castle still more was the endless variety of wonderful apparitions which assailed Huldbrand and Bertalda in the vaulted passages of the building, and of which nothing had ever been heard before within the memory of man. The tall white man in whom Huldbrand but too plainly recognized Undine's uncle Culeborn, and Bertalda the spectral master of the waterworks, often passed before them with threatening aspect and gestures, more especially, however, before Bertalda, so that through terror she had several times already fallen sick, and had in consequence frequently thought of quitting the castle. Yet partly because Huldbrand was but too dear to her, and she trusted to her innocence, since no words of love had passed between them, and partly also because she knew not whither to direct her steps, she lingered where she was. The old fisherman, on receiving the message from the Lord of Ringstetten that Bertalda was his guest, returned answer in some lines almost too illegible to be deciphered, but still the best his advanced life and long disuse of writing permitted him to form. "I have now become," he wrote, "a poor old widower, for my beloved and faithful wife is dead. But lonely as I now sit in my cottage, I prefer Bertalda's remaining where she is to her living with me. Only let her do nothing to hurt my dear Undine, else she will have my curse." The last words of this letter Bertalda flung to the winds, but the permission to remain from home which her father had granted her she remembered and clung to, just as we are all of us wont to do in similar circumstances. One day, a few moments after Huldbrand had ridden out, Undine called together the domestics of the family and ordered them to bring a large stone, and carefully to cover with it a magnificent fountain that was situated in the middle of the castle court. The servants objected that it would oblige them to bring water from the valley below. Undine smiled sadly. "I am sorry, my friends," replied she, "to increase your labor. I would rather bring up the water vessels myself. But this fountain must indeed be closed. Believe me when I say that it must be done, and that only by doing it we can avoid a greater evil." The domestics were all rejoiced to gratify their gentle mistress, and making no further inquiry, they seized the enormous stone. While they were raising it in their hands, and were now on the point of adjusting it over the fountain, Bertalda came running to the place and cried with an air of command that they must stop, that the water she used, so improving to her complexion, was brought from this fountain, and that she would by no means allow it to be closed. This time, however, Undine, while she showed her usual gentleness, showed more than her usual resolution. She said it belonged to her, as mistress of the house, to direct the household according to her best judgment, and that she was accountable in this to no one but her lord and husband. "See, oh, pray see," exclaimed the dissatisfied and indignant Bertalda, "how the beautiful water is curling and curving, winding and waving there, as if disturbed at being shut out from the bright sunshine, and from the cheerful view of the human countenance for whose mirror it was created." In truth, the water of the fountain was agitated, and foaming and hissing in a surprising manner. It seemed as if there were something within, possessing life and will, that was struggling to free itself from confinement. But Undine only the more earnestly urged the accomplishment of her commands. This earnestness was scarcely required. The servants of the castle were as happy in obeying their gentle lady as in opposing the haughty spirit of Bertalda. And however the latter might scold and threaten, still the stone was in a few minutes lying firm over the opening of the fountain. Undine leaned thoughtfully over it, and wrote with her beautiful fingers on the flat surface. She must, however, have had something very sharp and corrosive in her hand, for when she retired, and the domestics went up to examine the stone, they discovered various strange characters upon it, which none of them had seen there before. When the knight returned home, toward evening, Bertalda received him with tears and complaints of Undine's conduct. He cast a severe glance of reproach at his poor wife, and she looked down in distress. Yet she said very calmly, "My lord and husband, you never reprove even a bondslave before you hear his defence. How much less, then, your wedded wife?" "Speak! What moved you to this singular conduct?" said the knight with a gloomy countenance. "I could wish to tell you when we are entirely alone," said Undine with a sigh. You can tell me equally well in the presence of Bertalda, he replied. Yes, if you command me, said Undine, but do not command me, pray do not. She looked so humble, affectionate, and obedient that the heart of the knight was touched and softened, and as if it felt the influence of a ray from better times. He kindly took her arm within his and led her to his apartment, where she spoke as follows. You already know something, my beloved lord of Culeborn, my evil-disposed uncle, and have often felt displeasure at meeting him in the passages of this castle. Several times he has terrified Bertalda even to swooning. He does this because he possesses no soul, being a mere elemental mirror of the outward world, while of the world within he can give no reflection. Then, too, he sometimes observes that you are displeased with me, that in my childish weakness I weep at this, and that Bertalda, it may be, laughs at the same moments. Hence it is that he imagines all is wrong with us, and in various ways mixes with our circle unbidden. What do I gain by reproving him, by showing displeasure, and sending him away? He does not believe a word I say. His poor nature has no idea that the joys and sorrows of love have so sweet a resemblance, and are so intimately connected that no power on earth is able to separate them. A smile shines in the midst of tears, and a smile calls forth tears from their dwelling place. She looked up at Hildebrand, smiling and weeping, and he again felt within his heart all the magic of his former love. She perceived it, and pressed him more tenderly to her, while with tears of joy she went on thus. When the disturber of our peace would not be dismissed with words, I was obliged to shut the door upon him, and the only entrance by which he has access to us is that fountain. His connection with the other water spirits here in this region is cut off by the valleys that border upon us, and his kingdom first commences farther off on the Danube, in whose tributary streams some of his good friends have their abode. For this reason I caused the stone to be placed over the opening of the fountain, and inscribed characters upon it which baffle all the efforts of my suspicious uncle, so that he now has no power of intruding either upon you or me or Bertalda. Human beings, it is true, notwithstanding the characters I have inscribed there, are able to raise the stone without any extraordinary trouble. There is nothing to prevent them. If you choose, therefore, remove it according to Bertalda's desire. But she assuredly knows not what she asks. The rude Culeborn looks with peculiar ill will upon her, and should those things come to pass that he has predicted to me, and which may happen without your meaning any evil, dearest, even you yourself would be exposed to peril. Huldbrand felt the generosity of his gentle wife in the depth of his heart, since she had been so active in confining her formidable defender, and even at the very moment she was reproached for it by Bertalda. He pressed her in his arms with the tenderest affection, and said with emotion, The stone shall remain unmoved, all remains and ever shall remain, just as you choose to have it, my sweetest Undine. These long-withheld expressions of tenderness she returned his caresses with lowly delight, and at length said, My dearest husband, since you are so kind and indulgent today, may I venture to ask a favor of you? See now, it is with you as with summer. Even amid its highest splendor, summer puts on the flaming and thundering crown of glorious tempests, in which it strongly resembles a king and god on earth. You too are sometimes terrible in your rebukes. Your eyes flash lightning, while thunder resounds in your voice, and although this may be quite becoming to you, I in my folly cannot but sometimes weep at it. But never, I entreat you, behave thus toward me on a river, or even when we are near any water, for if you should, my relations would acquire a right over me. They would inexorably tear me from you in their fury, because they would conceive that one of their race was injured, and I should be compelled as long as I live to dwell below in the crystal palaces, and never dare to ascend to you again. Or should they send me up to you? Oh God, that would be far worse still. No, no, my beloved husband, let it not come to that, if your poor Undine is dear to you. He solemnly promised to do as she desired, And inexpressibly happy and full of affection, the married pair returned from the apartment. At this very moment Bertalda came with some work-people whom she had meanwhile ordered to attend her, and said with a fretful air, which she had assumed of late, "Well now, the secret consultation is at an end. The stone may be removed. Go out, workmen, and see to it." The knight, however, highly resenting her impertinence, said in brief and very decisive terms, "The stone remains where it is." He reproved Bertalda also for the vehemence that she had shown towards his wife. Whereupon the workmen, smiling with secret satisfaction, withdrew, while Bertalda, pale with rage, hurried away to her room. When the hour of supper came, Bertalda was waited for in vain. They sent for her, but the domestic found her apartments empty, and brought back with him only a sealed letter addressed to the knight. He opened it in alarm, and read, "I feel with shame that I am only the daughter of a poor fisherman, that I for one moment forgot this. I will make expiation in the miserable hut of my parents. Farewell to you and your beautiful wife." Undine was troubled at heart. With eagerness she entreated Huldbrand to hasten after their friend who had flown, and bring her back with him. Alas, she had no occasion to urge him. His passion for Bertalda again burst forth with vehemence. He hurried round the castle, inquiring whether anyone had seen which way the fair fugitive had gone. He could gain no information, and was already in the court on his horse, determining to take at a venture the road by which he had conducted Bertalda to the castle, when there appeared a page who assured him that he had met the lady on the path to the Black Valley. Swift as an arrow, the knight sprang through the gate in the direction pointed out, without hearing Undine's voice of agony as she cried after him from the window, "To the Black Valley! Oh, no, not there! Huldbrand, not there! Or if you will go, for heaven's sake, take me with you." But when she perceived that all her calling was of no avail, she ordered her white palfrey to be instantly saddled, and followed the knight, without permitting a single servant to accompany her. The Black Valley lies secluded far among the mountains. What its present name may be I am unable to say. At the time of which I am speaking, the country people gave it this appellation from the deep obscurity produced by the shadows of lofty trees, more especially by a crowded growth of firs that covered this region of moorland. Even the brook, which bubbled between the rocks, assumed the same dark hue, and showed nothing of that cheerful aspect which streams are wont to wear that have the blue sky immediately above them. It was now the dusk of evening, and between the heights it had become extremely wild and gloomy. The knight, in great anxiety, skirted the border of the brook. He was at one time fearful that, by delay, he should allow the fugitive to advance too far before him, and then again, in his too eager rapidity, he was afraid he might somewhere overlook and pass by her, should she be desirous of concealing herself from his search. He had in the meantime penetrated pretty far into the valley, and might hope soon to overtake the maiden, provided he were pursuing the right track. The fear indeed that he might not as yet have gained it made his heart beat with more and more of anxiety. In the stormy night which was now approaching, and which always fell more fearfully over this valley, where would the delicate Bertalda shelter herself should he fail to find her? At last, while these thoughts were darting across his mind, he saw something white glimmer through the branches on the ascent of the mountain. He thought he recognized Bertalda's robe, and he directed his course towards it. But his horse refused to go forward. He reared with a fury so uncontrollable, and his master was so unwilling to lose a moment, that, especially as he saw the thickets were altogether impassable on horseback, he dismounted, and having fastened his snorting steed to an elm, worked his way with caution through the matted underwood. The branches, moistened by the cold drops of the evening dew, struck against his forehead and cheeks. Distant thunder muttered from the further side of the mountains, and everything put on so strange an appearance that he began to feel a dread of the white figure, which now lay at a short distance from him upon the ground. Still he could see distinctly that it was a female, either asleep or in a swoon, and dressed in a long white garments, such as Bertalda had worn the past day. Approaching quite near to her, he made a rustling with the branches and a ringing with his sword, but she did not move. "Bertalda!" he cried, at first low, then louder and louder, yet she heard him not. At last, when he uttered the dear name with an energy yet more powerful, a hollow echo from the mountain summits around the valley returned the deadened sound. "Bertalda!" Still the sleeper continued insensible. He stooped down, but the duskiness of the valley and the obscurity of twilight would not allow him to distinguish her features. While with painful uncertainty he was bending over her, a flash of lightning suddenly shot across the valley. By the stream of light he saw a frightfully distorted visage close to his own, and a hoarse voice reached his ear. "You enamoured swain, give me a kiss." Huldbrand sprang upon his feet with a cry of horror, and the hideous figure rose with him. "Go home," it cried with a deep murmur. "The fiends are abroad. Go home, or I have you." And it stretched towards him its long white arms. "Malicious Culeborn!" exclaimed the knight with restored energy. "If Culeborn you are, what business have you here? What's your will, you goblin? There, take your kiss!" And in fury he struck his sword at the form. But it vanished like vapor, and a rush of water which wetted him through and through left him in no doubt with what foe he had been engaged. "He wishes to frighten me back from my pursuit of Bertalda," said he to himself. "He imagines that I shall be terrified at his senseless tricks, and resign the poor distressed maiden to his power, so that he can wreak his vengeance upon her at will. But that he shall not, weak spirit of the flood. What the heart of man can do, when it exerts the full force of its will and of its noblest powers, the poor goblin cannot fathom." He felt the truth of his words, and that they had inspired his heart with fresh courage. Fortune, too, appeared to favour him, for before reaching his fastened steed he distinctly heard the voice of Bertalda, weeping not far before him, amid the roar of the thunder and the tempest, which every moment increased. He flew swiftly towards the sound, and found the trembling maiden just as she was attempting to climb the steep, hoping to escape from the dreadful darkness of this valley. He drew near her with expressions of love, and bold and proud as her resolution had so lately been, she now felt nothing but joy that the man whom she so passionately loved should rescue her from this frightful solitude, and thus call her back to the joyful life in the castle. She followed, almost unresisting, but so spent with fatigue that the knight was glad to bring her to his horse, which he now hastily unfastened from the elm, in order to lift the fair wanderer upon him, and then to lead him carefully by the reins through the uncertain shades of the valley. But owing to the wild apparition of Culeborn, the horse had become wholly unmanageable, rearing and wildly snorting as he was. The knight must have used uncommon effort to mount the beast himself. To place the trembling Bertalda upon him was impossible. They were compelled, therefore, to return home on foot. While with one hand the knight drew the steed after him by the bridle, he supported the tottering Bertalda with the other. She exerted all the strength in her power in order to escape speedily from this vale of terrors, but weariness weighed her down like lead, and all her limbs trembled, partly in consequence of what she had suffered from the extreme terror which Culeborn had already caused her, and partly from her present fear at the roar of the tempest and thunder amid the mountain forest. At last she slid from the arm of the knight, and sinking upon the moss, she said, "Only let me lie here, my noble lord. I suffer the punishment due to my folly, and I must perish here through faintness and dismay." "Never, gentle lady, will I leave you," cried Huldbrand, vainly trying to restrain the furious animal he was leading, for the horse was all in a foam, and began to chafe more ungovernably than before, till the knight was glad to keep him at such a distance from the exhausted maiden as to save her from a new alarm. But hardly had he withdrawn 5 steps with the frantic steed, when she began to call after him in the most sorrowful accents, fearful that he would actually leave her in this horrible wilderness. He was at a loss what course to take. He would gladly have given the enraged beast his liberty. He would have let him rush away amid the night and exhaust his fury, had he not feared that in this narrow defile his iron-shod hoofs might come thundering over the very spot where Bertalda lay. In this extreme peril and embarrassment he heard with delight the rumbling wheels of a wagon as it came slowly descending the stony way behind them. He called out for help. Answer was returned in the deep voice of a man, bidding them have patience, but promising assistance. And 2 grey horses soon after shone through the bushes, and near them their driver in the white frock of a carter, and next appeared a great sheet of white linen, with which the goods he seemed to be conveying were covered. The greys, in obedience to a shout from their master, stood still. He came up to the knight and aided him in checking the fury of the foaming charger. I know well enough, said he, what is the matter with the brute. The first time I travelled this way, my horses were just as wilful and headstrong as yours. The reason is, there is a water spirit haunts this valley, and a wicked wight they say he is, who takes delight in mischief and witcheries of this sort. But I've learned a charm, and if you will let me whisper it in your horse's ear, he will stand just as quiet as my silver greys there. Try your luck, then, and help us as quickly as possible, said the impatient knight. Upon this the wagoner drew down the head of the rearing courser close to his own, and spoke some words in his ear. The animal instantly stood still and subdued. Only his quick panting and smoking sweat showed his recent violence. Huldbrand had little time to inquire by what means this had been effected. He agreed with the man that he should take Bertalda in his wagon, where, as he said, a quantity of soft cotton was stowed, and he might in this way convey her to Castle Ringstetten. The knight could accompany them on horseback, but the horse appeared to be too much exhausted to carry his master so far. Seeing this, the man advised him to mount the wagon with Bertalda. The horse could be attached to it behind. It is downhill, said he, and the load for my greys will therefore be light. The knight accepted his offer, and entered the wagon with Bertalda. The horse followed patiently after, while the wagoner, sturdy and attentive, walked beside them. Amid the silence and deepening obscurity of the night, the tempest sounding more and more remote, in the comfortable feeling of their security, a confidential conversation arose between Huldbrand and Bertalda. He reproached her in the most flattering words for her resentful flight. She excused herself with humility and feeling, and from every tone of her voice it shone out like a lamp guiding to the beloved through night and darkness that Huldbrand was still dear to her. The knight felt the sense of her words rather than heard the words themselves, and answered simply to this sense. Then the wagoner suddenly shouted with a startling voice, "Up, my greys, up with your feet! Hey now together! Show your spirit! Remember who you are!" The knight bent over the side of the wagon and saw that the horses had stepped into the midst of a foaming stream, and were indeed almost swimming, while the wheels of the wagon were rushing round and flashing like mill wheels, and the wagoner had got on before to avoid the swell of the flood. "What sort of a road is this? It leads into the middle of the stream," cried Huldbrand to his guide. "Not at all, sir," returned he with a laugh. "It is just the contrary. The stream is running in the middle of the road. Only look about you and see how all is overflowed." The whole valley, in fact, was in commotion, as the waters, suddenly raised and visibly rising, swept over it. "'Tis Culeborn, that evil water spirit who wishes to drown us," exclaimed the knight. "Have you no charm of protection against him, friend?" "I have one," answered the wagoner, "but I cannot and must not make use of it before you know who I am." "Is this the time for riddles?" cried the knight. "The flood is every moment rising higher, and what does it concern me to know who you are?" "But mayhap it does concern you, though," said the guide, "for I am Culeborn." Thus speaking, he thrust his head into the wagon and laughed with a distorted visage. But the wagon remained a wagon no longer. The grey horses were horses no longer. All was transformed to foam. All sank into the waters that rushed and hissed around them, while the wagoner himself, rising in the form of a gigantic wave, dragged the vainly struggling courser under the waters, and rose again, huge as a liquid tower, swept over the heads of the floating pair, and was on the point of burying them irrecoverably beneath it. Then the soft voice of Undine was heard through the uproar. The moon emerged from the clouds, and by its light Undine was seen on the heights above the valley. She rebuked, she threatened the floods below her. The menacing and tower-like billow vanished, muttering and murmuring. The waters gently flowed away under the beams of the moon, while Undine, like a hovering white dove, flew down the hill, raised the knight and Bertalda, and bore them to a green spot, where by her earnest efforts she soon restored them and dispelled their terrors. She then assisted Bertalda to mount the white palfrey on which she herself had been borne to the valley, and thus all three returned homeward to Castle Ringstetten. That seems like a decent place for us to end this reading. We will maybe we'll finish it next time. We'll see. Thank you for listening. Have a good evening, or morning, or whenever this happens to be.